Hello and welcome to another AutoTalk podcast and video. Now, no matter where you are watching this, we do encourage you to like and subscribe, be that on your podcast app or on YouTube. I'll put a little thing down the bottom there that points out how you do that. It's the best way to get more content from us and also a really great way to support the rather expensive business of putting this stuff together for AutoTalk. Now, our guests today are Jonothan Whyte, and Jonathan is a staff barrister for Catherine Stewart. They are employment law specialists. And we have Greig Epps from the Motor Trade Association. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we're here to discuss a somewhat contentious subject for the whole country, but it is something that businesses and car dealers and workshops and everyone around the place is potentially going to have to face over the next few months, and that is vaccinations. And more importantly, what is happening in regard to the potential for mandatory vaccinations or needing to know information about the vaccination status of staff and even customers when they are entering your premises. And this is quite a deep subject. This could require or allow for businesses to mandate vaccinations. And also that could have an impact on when and where they can trade under the traffic light system, and also what assistance they could get in future. There at the start that this is very much a moving situation and we don't 100% know all the answers. And that none of this should be taken as legal advice. You should be speaking to your own legal expert on this. And if I go to you first, Jonathan, would it be fair to say that a lot of this is being done on the run? We've had mentions from ministers and the Prime Minister about what could be mandated, but no law is actually really in place around this yet?
Yeah, that's basically right. I suppose, dealing with this once in a century situation, this pandemic, like with the rest of the government's response, a lot of it has had to be done on the fly. So, there's been calls for mandates and guidance around this topic from business and I think from unions as well, to be fair, for a long time now. And we've finally seen the end of last month, alongside the traffic light system, a more expanding out of the mandate along with this traffic light system. So where things are at the moment is essentially that we have the existing mandated groups of staff. So teachers and healthcare workers are just kicking in now. Prior to that, of course, it was MIQ workers and airport workers and so on. What the government has now said is that they're looking to expand it out to close contact workplaces. So, putting limitations on hospitality, on gyms, those areas where there's a sort of a high level of personal interaction and proximity. And I guess where things are at now is we don't exactly know what the parameters for that will be. So they are clearly signaling that they're only wanting to place those strong restrictions around higher risk workplaces. But on the other hand, they've also said that there will be capacity for any employer in principle to look at introducing a vaccination mandate. And to do that, they'll need to go through a risk assessment. So at the moment, WorkSafe, which is the government's health and safety regulator, has put out guidance around the factors which employers should be considering when they're making that assessment. And what the minister has said is that they want to simplify that and codify it into legislation. So ideally, it's more black and white for employers and employees, for that matter, to be able to have a conversation, assess what needs to happen in their workplace. But the details are all in the air at this stage.
So if I can summarize that, if we take the car dealers and the vehicle service centres, they haven't been put on a list yet where they're going to be required to mandate vaccinations. There could be an option in the future for them to do that if they choose to do so.
I think that seems to be the case right now, yes. There's a complicating factor in all of this, which is that every employer needs to be looking after the health and safety of everybody on their site, their workers and their customers and everyone. So I think that it's going to be important moving forward that even employers who don't necessarily get specifically identified by the government as an area which really needs to have a mandate, nonetheless takes a look at it, reviews for themselves whether one is needed and has those conversations with staff around it.
Mm-hmm. Greig, have you guys had any thoughts at the MTA about whether dealers should be considering, if this comes up, mandating vaccinations or even establishing the level of vaccinations within their business?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan's put it pretty clearly that there's going to be this option for. It seems like there's going to be an option for the business owner to make an assessment, and it's the sort of thing they should be doing for just general health and safety purposes, looking after everyone who works on their site and everyone who comes onto their site. So, especially for car dealers, of course, they'll be looking at customers coming in to test drive cars or even just to buy the car. Um, the assessment process that we understand is going to be in the legislation. I think every business owner should look at that assessment and apply it to their business. Because I think that's what the government wants us to do. Here's our guidance on whether or not you can require vaccine mandates for your staff, or whether or not you can require vaccine certificates for people coming to your business. And really, you apply those, you run through that assessment. If you don't meet that assessment, you go back to first principles, and it's the first principles that we've been supporting for the whole period here, which is mask, social distance, sanitize, and if you're not feeling well, stay home. Those sorts of things that people need to be thinking about.
So when we're talking about risk assessments there, are we talking about it's arguably risky to allow to expect a vaccinated staff member to work alongside someone who is unvaccinated and could have a higher chance of bringing the COVID-19 virus into the workplace?
Yeah, well, we understand the risk assessments are around, as Jonathan said, that we can see that they're talking about mandating for close contact workplaces, and even the WorkSafe guidance that's out there at the moment talks about each role. You need to look at the each role that's being considered. So you may end up finding that within your business there are some roles that might require a vaccine and some that won't. But it really comes down to that idea of close contact. And so I think the risk that they're looking for is how can you be transmitting the disease to someone else, or do you risk getting it when you come in contact with someone? And again, that's why we've come back to saying to people, look, however this risk assessment pans out, whether you end up with a vaccine requirement or not, masking, distancing, and sanitizing are still the real keystones of the public health initiative. You got to look at the fact as well that the Ministry of Health puts on the website that even being vaccinated does not mean that you're immune. You're immune, but you're not unsusceptible to stuff. You could still get COVID with the vaccination. You just are less likely to get it, and if you do get it, you're less likely to suffer badly with it. So the fact of the matter is, if we've got vaccinated and unvaccinated mixing, everyone is still at risk, and so whether or not you end up with a vaccine mandate for your business, it will still be highly recommended to keep masking and distancing in place until we know that we've got this under control.
If a dealer goes ahead and trades without putting any controls in place, or without following even the basic items like you mentioned there, is there a risk that in the case of an outbreak within the workforce, that WorkSafe could investigate and treat it as a workplace incident?
I think that's a Jonathan question.
I would think so. I mean, I was going to say actually that masks and hand washing and distancing protocols and everything, it's not an optional thing. It's really an essential thing, because those are the bread and butter measures to make sure that you're protecting your people at work, right? So yeah, I think if there was a dealer out there or a business out there who was clearly just disregarding even basic COVID protection, health and safety measures, then yeah, if there was an outbreak, they could be in trouble with WorkSafe. Potentially, they could be prosecuted, and certainly, the employees at that workplace would very likely have claims against that employer for failing to provide a safe workplace.
Wow.
And in fact, employees are entitled under the Employment Relations Act to strike if they have reasonable grounds to have concern for their health and safety. So potentially, you could see staff walking off the job and protest, and they would be well within their rights to do that. So it is very important that the standard measures are in place, and that vaccination, if it's appropriate, is being seriously looked into.
Jonathan, are you allowed to ask an employee's vaccination status? Is that legal, or are there privacy concerns around that?
So it's private information, of course, whether an individual is vaccinated or any other sort of medical information. But there can be good reasons for an employer to want to access that information. I think the most important first step is to make sure you have a legitimate reason to ask. So, if you're asking for genuine health and safety reasons, particularly against the context of a vaccination mandate, then clearly there's a good reason for you to be asking. If you're just asking because you're curious, then I would probably steer people away from doing that. Potentially it could be lawful. We haven't had, I think, a specific decision around that, but erring on the side of caution, unless you genuinely need to know for a health and safety reason, I wouldn't recommend asking.
Mm-hmm. Greig, have you had any thoughts around whether dealers or service centres should be assessing the vaccination status of their staff? Is that data you think they do need to have for a health and safety purpose?
Look, as Jonathan said, it's private information. Now, you can ask, but as he said, what's your reason for asking? And this goes to any of the conversations you're having with your staff around these policies as well, because ultimately, even once the legislation comes into place, every workplace is going to need to figure out how that legislation applies to it and set out that in a policy. And you will need to then take that to your staff and talk to them about it. Now, if as part of, say, your risk assessment process, you consider it necessary to understand how well vaccinated your staff are, that might be a reason to ask, and I would think you could put it into your consultation, but the staff may not necessarily have to answer that. And you need to also be very careful about how you're handling that information. It's not something that people might necessarily want the rest of the workplace to know. So you've got to make sure you're looking after that information safely. It may come into your risk assessment, but you'd need to show why you need to do that. As Jonathan said, there has to be a good reason for asking for that sort of information.
I guess from a data protection level, it needs to be treated almost as the same kind of level of security as someone's bank account number.
Essentially, it is very confidential information, and you certainly don't want to be going into a team meeting on Monday morning saying, "All right, guys, which one of you are vaccinated?" It's not going to be a good way to go. I think it's all about that good faith, that duty of good faith, dealing with one another in a respectful way, and hearing what employees have to say on the topic. Another point, actually, which came to mind before around the harms and whether a vaccine mandate is justified, is just the sort of psychosocial harms, which is another aspect. So it actually is a relevant consideration in the assessment to consider the level of sort of, I guess, stress and fear or insecurity which some members of staff might feel working around unvaccinated members of staff or unvaccinated members of the public. So that is a genuine consideration, as well as the sort of the physical risk of infection. There is also the mental, potential mental health considerations around the risk of infection. So there's a lot for employers to be digesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, if you think about health and safety at work, it's the workplace and it's everyone who comes into the workplace. So, you'd need to be thinking about your customer base. Who do we normally have coming in here? What am I doing to ensure they're protected from anything that might be here on the workplace? And now that, the concern is that with COVID more prevalent, that one of the things you need to protect them from is you're protecting your workplace from COVID coming in, but also for anyone coming onto your workplace, you're trying to ensure that they're protected as well. So there's all sorts of considerations in play here. And again, I was just thinking as well around the conversations with staff. You do start to get to a situation where perhaps you need to be talking about their health status in terms of are they immune compromised, or do they feel that they're more susceptible? And the psychological aspect that Jonathan also mentioned before we started recording, we were chatting about the fact that a lot of the rules and things that have come out have been less mandatory, and more coercive. And the thing with coercion is that it plays on your mind, and so you may have staff who may not be comfortable with going down a certain path, but feel coerced based on the way the law has gone, based on peer pressure from other staff, based on your statements as a business owner about what you want to see them do. So we need to take that into consideration about the stresses that may be placing on staff.
Very good point. Yeah.
Could we see, Greg? Do you think some dealerships running somewhat of a dual channel system where vaccinated customers are allowed to come in and interact in a normal way within the dealership, while unvaccinated customers are run through the existing contactless system?
Oh, Richard, you're heading down the path there where you'll have one water fountain for your unvaccinated customers and another water fountain for your vaccinated customers. And I don't think that's a space we want to get into. I think it is about treating everyone as I think potentially you treat everyone as a risk. Because even as we said before, a vaccinated person may still carry. They may be the chap who went to Tonga, double vaccinated, asymptomatic, tested negative before he left, tested positive when he arrived in Tonga. At this point in time, until we get the high rates of vaccination in the community, until we feel that there's that herd immunity that we talk about, you almost do have to treat everyone as a risk. And so, if so the water fountain example would be everyone who goes to the water fountain. It's a disposable cup, it's hand sanitizer. It's, as we said, going back to those basics, distancing, masking, sanitizing.
It could be essentially, and look, the industry seems to be chugging along quite well on the current settings, even within Auckland, that some of those restrictions could essentially just by default become the new way for some time to be of trading.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that what they've suggested with the traffic light system as well is that even for businesses that sit within the vaccine certificate regime, have the option to say, oh, well, we won't ask for a vaccine certificate, but then they place themselves under more restrictions. Mm-hmm. It does then become again, part of that risk assessment for the business owner to say, look, I think asking for a vaccine certificate is going to be too difficult for my operations. You think about a car dealership, they're very open. Do you start channeling people through one entrance way, which is not very welcoming? You want people to come onto the yard and have a look at the cars and be wandering around. Are you going to have someone who chases every new person down and say, can I see your vaccine certificate? Oh, you don't have one. Well, you can only look at those cars over there. The vaccines, they may decide that, well, we won't ask for a vaccine certificate, but that means we can only have 10 people on the lot at any one time. Maybe we can live with that. We need to have more masking and distancing. We can live with that because we've been doing it. And as you said, the industry has been doing okay. There's been good sales. We've got to be mindful of the other economic impacts that are coming towards us, increased interest rates, so tougher to get finance, supply chain issues, the CCD and Clean Car Standard over the next couple of years, because we don't know how long this is all going to last. But, I think it will be, just from a business economic point of view, next year tough. So again, you're going to be putting that into your assessment of how many restrictions do I put on customers coming to my business. When it's tough enough, it may end up being tough enough to be running your business next year anyway. So you're going to be weighing up those sorts of things around how you bring your customers onto the premises.
Mm.
Jonathan, should a dealer go through this process, their risk assessment? Should a dealer go through this process, their risk assessment, have a vaccinated staff, essentially, regardless of what they do with their customers? What are the legalities around that? I mean, can you terminate staff for refusing to vaccinate, or can you have vaccination as part of your requirements when you hire? I mean, what's the legal status of that? And is it likely to change?
So this is a space that's under development, but we have got some indication of intention from the government. I guess what I would say just regarding new employees is that it probably is going to be much easier for employers to begin onboarding people with a mandate into a workplace that already has a mandate, and that where the biggest sort of challenges or troubles may arise is probably going to be rolling it out within existing workplaces. But in terms of how you can go about it, what the government has said is that they want to make it so for these places with vaccination certificates, and so we don't know whether it will be a requirement if you are going to use vaccine certificates that you also impose that on your staff if you're not in that group of people of workplaces they've identified. So this is all sort of in the air, but in principle, if you have the vaccine certificate requirement at the front of the lot, then everyone on board needs to be vaccinated as well. And they're saying they're going to make it so there's a 4-week period, and you have to pay your staff or allow them paid time away from work to go down to the doctors and get a vaccination. And at the end of that 4-week period, after you've done the process, the initial process seems to be how it will go, then they can be dismissed if they haven't got a vaccination by the end of that. Of course, before you go down that track, you need to make sure that there's a good reason to have the vaccination mandate. Do that risk assessment, particularly once the new legislated version comes out. But also, there may be some legitimate exemptions. So things like religious reasons for not wanting to undergo the vaccination. I think relatively small numbers, but nonetheless, there will be genuine cases. And also medical reasons. So medical reasons may be the one to watch, because so there was a Law Society seminar a couple of weeks ago, and the Immunization Advisory Centre presenter there said, strictly speaking, there's probably only 100 people in the country who really, really can't have the Pfizer vaccine. But those are the really, really can't have people with a strong contraindication. What the government's just put out in the last week or two with the teacher and health workers order is an exemption policy, which basically says that for teachers and health workers, if a medical practitioner, qualified medical practitioner, considers it would be inappropriate for you to have a vaccine, then you can be exempted from the mandate. So that's for the strict government mandates, but I imagine we'll probably see something similar filtering through to really all employers. Would seem likely. This is all entirely subject to the final decision, and the devil's in the detail, but I think we're likely to see that. So there's probably going to have to be some careful navigation around potential medical reasons for not getting it, because of course if an employer is in the position where they think we genuinely need this, we need our people to be vaccinated because it's a 50% less chance that you're going to show up to work with COVID essentially, or whatever the exact percentage is, but a significant reduction. And then someone says, oh, well, my doctor, I don't think I should need to. My doctor says this and that. Well, it's going to need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So that's a space to watch too.
Mm-hmm. I guess that point that Jonathan made there about it's a significantly lower chance of it coming into the business. Greg, that's got to weigh on some business people's minds, isn't it? That essentially if you don't take these precautions and someone does have it, then potentially your business is shut down for a period of time while these things are sorted out.
Well, that's right, because there's the whole deep clean process and contact tracing and all that, but and there is also this issue of risk assessments. Some people take less risk than other people. Now, anyone who's running a business has obviously already taken quite a big risk. And the question might be, are they then more risk averse having established that business because it was such a big risk to get going that they want to be certain about their operations, and so they would want to be putting the strongest protections in place to ensure that they don't get shut down at some point, or risk bringing COVID into the workplace and creating a shutdown. So we may see that, but again, there's a lot of grey area in what's been talked about. There's a lot of grey area in the rules that have been out already, say around essential services. Now, there has been talk I've heard of possibly looking at whether or not essential services might have vaccine mandates, but we've already seen, and you and I have had these conversations in the past about, what's essential and where do dealerships run into being essential, where do repairers run into being essential in the way that they support other essential activities. How wide does that go? So, as we've called quite often for more clarity around that, we may find ourselves again in a situation where we're being presented with rules that we'll pore over for days on end, trying to make sure we can give businesses the best possible guidance around. But again, the government is also trying to, they need to try and put a broad brush across a whole lot of situations. And Jonathan's been saying a lot of great stuff. Devil in the detail. When we see it, we'll have a better sense of what's out there.
And I guess my last question is for you as well, Greig, but that Jonathan might have a take. We've seen businesses across the spectrum, including car dealers, almost use COVID as part of their marketing in the last 2 years. Reassuring customers with their sanitizing rules, their contact tracing setups, all these kind of things. Do you think we could see some start to market on their vaccination levels or the vaccination status of the business?
Yeah, come on down. We're double vaxxed. You're completely safe here, and we've deep cleaned every car. I think as with the environmental side of things, green is a selling point. Hygienic may well be the next selling point for the next 18 months to 2 years, however long we're still going through some of these processes. No, you're absolutely right. It could be a selling point. And that, again, as we said earlier, we'll come back to a conversation with your staff to say, hey, look, guys, we want to get people in here. And the best way to get people in here is if we can say to them, hand on our hearts, we're all vaxxed, you're safe with us. And that might be the spur. We already saw earlier this year Steel and Tube offering incentive payments to staff to go and get vaccinated. So businesses have been seeing the vaccination as something that they can use within their advertising. So yeah, absolutely, I think that could happen.
Now, Jonathan, what's the best way do you think for people to stay on top of this? I guess engage with your employment or HR expert. Keep an eye on the news. It's a tricky thing that needs a lot of analysis at the moment.
It really is, and we've been fielding so many inquiries from employers and employees about these issues, and it is really changing on a daily basis. I said as we were starting that, oh, look, a new article's just come out from the Prime Minister talking about vaccination mandates, and that is really where it's at. So I think it would be, strongly advisable to get in touch with the experts who are across the topics, staying on top of these things. Mm-hmm. I think it can be quite a rabbit hole to go down, and it's not a rabbit hole which necessarily every dealer, every member of NTA out there is going to want to go down. get that good guidance, make sure you're doing things by the book. And just on the point around advertising your vaccinated status, I think that's a really good point. I think, it probably will become potentially a marketing point, but bringing it back to privacy, it is really, really important that you get consent. So in that case, I would say you're going to want to get written consent from each of your employees. And also you need to make sure you genuinely have the evidence to confirm their status, right? Otherwise you're putting up something which is untrue. So yeah, all interesting points which we can't wait to, touch wood, get clarity from the government on, but I think we're getting the sense of the shape of things. So yeah.
You can't go and put up an ad that says all vaccinated staff brackets except Steve in service. Excellent. Look, thank you so much for joining us and discussing that really complicated topic. That's Jonothan Whyte from Catherine Stewart and Greig Epps from the Motor Trade Association. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Richard.
Richard.